Thank you very much, Catherine, for your generous introduction. Thank you very much for the Institute for hosting me. It's been a pleasure being here for 2 days, allergies notwithstanding, but I'm loving it. Being in nature, and it's lovely to see some, old friends, not too old, but known them for a while, and meet new friends and colleagues. So I think we have been covering a lot of the topics since this morning today. There will be some repetition possibly, but the conversation is really like what you both said is what's important. We need to be having these conversations to understand how we're moving forward, to understand how to also avoid some of the pitfalls that have happened. As mentioned earlier, there have been some precedents. This is not the first time something like this happened. And so we need to sort of, look back at certain points. So because, being a witness and at times participants in the history and its making, actually it makes assessment extremely possible because we're living it, it's happening. And much is unfolding and too fast. And so we are not able to assess everything fully, which is okay, because, things do change meaning and significance in time. And we understand things, differently as we experience them and look back at them. So I started thinking that this talk will give me the opportunity to look at the big picture, to try to understand and find ways to eventually write this history. To be honest, however, what is taking place is too much and too fast to contain now. The rapid change in the Saudi art scene, and rapid change is a word we started today, discussing whether this is a volcano or change, is not all clear yet. We have to keep that in mind. If you look at the Ministry of Culture's website, for example, you see that even they can't seem to keep up with the pace of what they are actually doing and what is actually happening. To help me delve into this very much in progress situation, I will begin with a few basic questions to kind of create a methodology with hopes to arrive at some critical views. Questions to ask: what is and what is happening in the art ecosystem in the Arabian Gulf? What does it mean or aim to do? Is there a collective strategy? How is it or isn't changing the narrative that has been ingrained in the art scene, history, and the fields of their studies? Does it want to actually change the narrative? Is another question to think of. But first, and as basic as it sounds, we do need to agree on some understanding of what does the global contemporary, as has been named and argued with pride and celebration of achievement, really mean. In the premise for the exhibition, The Global Contemporary Art Worlds After 1989, that was on view in September 2011 to February 2012, the curators contemplated the following: globalization as a phase in the geopolitical transformation, and I'm sort of emphasizing certain words as I speak them, right? Globalization as the phase in the geopolitical transformation of the world is at once a transformation of art, of the conditions of its production, and possibilities of its diffusion and dissemination and presence. At the same time, artists, and above all, the institutions of art, are faced with the questions as to the extent to which the concept global can and must be thought, and how this reflects back on its own methods of working, end of quote. In the accompanying book they published in 2013, the editors stated, quote again, "The geography of the visual arts changed with the end of the Cold War." The emphasis here is on the political sort of, terminology used. Contemporary art was no longer defined, exhibited, interpreted, and acquired according to the blueprint drawn up in New York, London, Paris, or Berlin. The art world distributed itself into art worlds. With the emergence of a new art scene in Asia and the Middle East, and the explosion of biennials, the visual arts have become globalized as surely as the world economy has, end of quote. I mean, we could spend an hour just on this sort of paragraph if we unpack it to understand, what does that even mean and what did this happen, particularly as this was said in 2011. But for our purposes, to include in the West Asia and North Africa region as a whole, and I use WANA, not Middle East and North Africa, specifically to use geography as opposed to geopolitical designations, and the Gulf specifically. I will accept that the contemporary period starts in the 1990s through today. Why? Because this is when the production of art and aesthetics shifted dramatically in the WANA region beyond the modernist discourse and formulations. Because the modern and postmodern, as manifested in the Euro-American sphere, does not equally apply in the region. This is also the beginning of a different diaspora engagement where artists, at least some, are not bound by one nationality that restricts them to one identity or one story, i.e. Arab art, for example, but also allows them for better freedom of mobility. Moreover, the end of the 1990s signaled a new interest in the WANA region by the Western world that was further intensified by 9/11 and the 2003 Iraq invasion, but was very different than their interest of the region in the 1970s and the oil crisis, which was translated into a stronger focus on Islamic art, actually, in museums rather than the contemporary, which is the focus of today. So this is the one. The what accepts that mainstream definition that this art challenges the conventional on every level, material, tools, skills, representation, styles, etc. It does also, we are told, I quote, negate or support expectations of artworks based on regional, cultural, and chronological associations. Intended meanings are often open-ended and subject to multiple interpretations, end of quote. Just to complicate things more. Thus embedded in such argument is the buzzwords of today, diversity, for example, which equally alludes to the other favorite contemporary concept, decolonization. So many terms here that beg for much elaboration, and some of which we addressed maybe indirectly, and they really do deserve criticality, but perhaps this is something we can pick up later. Next, I want to alert all of us and caution all of us that speaking of the Gulf region, GCC, the Gulf art scene, is as problematic as speaking of the Arab world and Arab art has been. It dissolves differences and assumes unity of sorts. Yet, similarly, there are reasons, as we saw, even though our focus today was mostly on Saudi, there are reasons, shared commonalities and goals, shared visions, that would justify the collective without denying the particular. For example, notions of identity in relationship to modernization and tradition are invoked through the region's different strategic future visions and plans. Qatar 2030, Saudi 2030, Abu Dhabi 2030, but the UAE is 2031. And thus also to consider is how then does the global operate within this context. Now let's look at a few examples of what is happening in the region, and some of which already we touched on, and their trajectory, contribution to a growing globalized ecosystem. Not neglecting developments of local scenes around the Arabian Gulf of the last century, today I'm specifically looking at new practices with ambitions to not only shift art centers from Europe and America to the region, but to be contributors, if not leaders, in the contemporary art world. This is also manifestly different than the market desires that prompted the opening of auction houses and creation of art fairs, starting with the Dubai Art Fair that is now a staple in the region, albeit arguably in crisis. I will specifically explore what is happening in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, and only specific projects that I basically spend the best part of this year jumping from one event to another to see. I will, however, avoid generalization, knowing that there are many other projects that I'm not going to touch on. I will also try to address briefly the issue of identity, that although Lina invoked it and we discussed it, has really been the pink elephant in the room that everyone touches on but tries to ignore. Incidentally, the national visions of the three countries strongly express the national identity, Qatari, Saudi, Emirati, but there is also more explicit references to the Islamic element than the Arab, for example, in the details of the visions. Qatar's vision does state, I quote, to preserve Qatar's national heritage and enhance Arab and Islamic values and identity. Saudi, I quote, the first pillar of our vision is our status as the heart of the Arab and Islamic worlds. The UAE's Sheikh Mohammed locates the UAE country in the Arab world when he said, I quote, the UAE is already the most innovative Arab nation. But the plan, I quote, seeks to enhance the position of the UAE as a global partner and an attractive and influential economic hub, end of quote. I mean, again, all of these are worthy of a lot of unpacking. Abu Dhabi's urban planning vision 2030 addresses new challenges brought about by demographic shifts in the Emirates, aiming at, I quote, developing physical plans and policies to shape Abu Dhabi Emirate as the leading global 21st century Arab capital and ensuring factors such as sustainability, infrastructure capacity, economic growth, and community planning are integrated to provide a high quality of life for all, end of quote. All of these plans have a strong cultural element that we see addressed by the various projects I will visit now. Launched in 2019 as a cultural initiative by Qatar Museums to celebrate the inauguration of the National Museum of Qatar, Qatar Creates was transformed in 2022 to parallel further developments in the country in preparation for the World Cup 2022. Started as an annual celebration of art, fashion, design, culture, and architecture through a week-long series of community events and programs, Qatar Creates, named as such to signal agency and contribution, one would say, aimed to be, I quote, a global summit for the cultural innovation economy, acting as a platform to promote local, regional, and international cultural perspectives. In 2022, Sheikh Al-Mayasa Al-Thani, the chairwoman of Qatar Museums, who leads the initiative, announced that Qatar Creates will be a year-round cultural movement and a platform for arts and culture in Qatar, with the objectives to champion and nurture talents. She adds, we are building a movement of access to the very best that our nation has to offer. Working with partners, we are embedding art and culture into Qatari society. Our premier product, the One Pass, gives our audience easy, direct, and simple access to all of Qatar's cultural offerings. QMA, rebranded in 2014 as Qatar Museums, was established along with the opening of the Museum of Islamic Art in 2008. Certainly a more aggressive method of integrating the arts in the Qatari culture, this centralized platform through Qatar Creates nevertheless continues QM's original policy to educate and promote culture, as well as working towards achieving the 2030 vision, particularly sustainability. QM today manages a growing number of institutions that goes beyond the initial Museum of Islamic Art to include the Mia Park, Mathaf Arab Museum of Modern Art, the National Museum of Qatar, QM Gallery Al-Riwaq, QM Gallery Qatara, 321 Qatar Olympics, and Sports Museum, Dadu's Children's Museum of Qatar, and the newly created Creative Hub comprising of the Fire Station, Artist in Residence, M7, Tasweer Qatar Photo Festival, and Liwan Design Studios and Labs, and to include Qatar's QM's upcoming museums and galleries, such as the Art Mill Museum, this is a museum of contemporary art, and Qatar Auto Museum and Lucille Museum, which is a museum of Orientalism. I mean, that's Yeah, that's a lot. Mia in 2008 and then Madhaf in 2010, those were the simple days, had specific objectives that are arguably very different than the current goals, as well as exhibited different collecting practices. At Madhaf, we wanted to subvert the Eurocentric narrative of modernism while allowing for the development of regional narratives of art history. But also, while the collection of Islamic art was always intended for a public museum, that of Madhaf was not. Qatar Creates, however, goes beyond the more scholarly aims of Madhaf and Mia that engaged with and created and catered to academia around the world. Qatar wants today to capitalize on cultural tourism that engages with the contemporary art world beyond individual projects. Qatar Creates' mission specifically states that its centralization, I quote, allows the public to hear about and access cultural activities, an unrivaled opportunity to immerse themselves and fully experience the myriad of cultural, leisure, and entertainment offering across the country. Qatar Creates showcases local and global talents to the world. End quote. This notion of showcasing local and global to the world is one we see expressed across initiatives around the region. The Saudi Minister of Culture, now I'm specifically not trying to privilege one over the other, so I'm just using the logo here. The Saudi Minister of Culture, Prince Badr bin Farhan, affirms on the ministry's website, Vision 2030's declaration that culture is, this is a long quote, indispensable to our quality of life. Oh, and notes, now this is the long quote, that the kingdom must increase both the quality and quantity of its cultural activity. The Ministry of Culture will deliver on both counts. Saudi culture stands on solid ground with Saudi creatives across various cultural sectors. We're proud of our rich cultural environment and talents with the potential to transcend the borders of our country to reach the world. The ministry will adopt a collaborative approach with our Saudi creatives, the jewel of our cultural sphere. We will develop an environment which supports and nurtures creativity, in addition to opening doors for new forms of expression. Saudi culture will remain as an essential part of our lives. The kingdom prides itself with a rich heritage and diverse traditions, spanning 13 regions. Talented creators in various aspects of culture have earned international recognition and performed or displayed their work in different parts of the world. And this kind of sums up, a lot of what we have been discussing this morning. In response, the ministry has launched a good number of projects that tries to cover all possible cultural aspects through the 11 commissions that we kind of mentioned as well. It created that covers the visual arts, museums, literature and publishing and translation, heritage, film, theater and performing arts, the libraries authority, music, architecture and design, fashion, and culinary arts. The cultural ecosystem in Saudi Arabia, however, is very complex, with a number of other entities that are connected but have their own directions and policies. We heard about the Royal Commission of Riyadh, and we also heard about the Royal Commission of El Ola. But for example, the Daraya Biennale Foundation that was established in 2020 by the Ministry of Culture, but is not part of any of the commissions. It is explained as, on its website, a catalyst for global dialogue between the growing, diverse art communities in Saudi Arabia and across the world. End of quote. The biennials aim to showcase, quote again, showcase some of the world's leading artists, drive cultural exchange between local and international communities, promote dialogue and understanding, and further establish Saudi Arabia as an important cultural center. Since its establishment, the foundation held 2 biennials. The Daraya Contemporary Art Biennial, held in the Jax district of Daraya Riyadh in 2021, and was curated by the director of the Beijing's UCCA Center for Contemporary Art, Philip Tinari. The biennale was titled Feeling the Stones, referencing a local 1980s slogan about crossing a river as a metaphor for the needed change. in Saudi Arabia. The biennial premise opened a dialogue between Saudi and China and included a strong contingent of Chinese artists, along with the larger number of Saudi artists. And then the second is the Islamic Art Biennial at the Western Hajj Terminal of King Abdulaziz International Airport in Jeddah, in purpose-built galleries and exhibition spaces that were created specifically for the Biennale. Inaugurated in early 2023, we are told is, I quote, set to be the world's most significant showcase of contemporary and historic works of Islamic art from across the globe, end of quote. Another sentence that requires a lot of unpacking. Labeled the biggest exhibition of Islamic art to have been staged since the World of Islam Festival in the UK in 1976, Melissa Gromnan wondered if it is a radical proposition to call it Islamic Art Biennial. The biennial calls back into question some of the old inquiries about the contested naming and categorization that has occupied scholars for a long time. What is Islamic art? Is Islamic a geographical, chronological, or thematic marker? Or is it made by Muslim artists? Is it religious? Is it not religious? Is it secular? How does it relate? And so many, many other questions. Many unresolved questions that we here now know very well. Perhaps thus, it is not surprising to hear the contradictions in the words of the curator. I quote, we were set a task to make something universal to the Muslim world, but that also reflects the particularity of this place, explained curator Dr. Julian Rabi, who's the historian of Islamic art. Continues, this is a different quote, sorry. This is a historic moment, not just for Saudi Arabia, but for the entire Muslim world, said Sumaya Bali, artistic director of the Biennale, the South African architect and principal of Johannesburg-based architectural studio Counterspace. But also added, at its essence, this biennial is about giving contemporary objects a home by giving them a lineage, and giving historic objects a home by giving them a future, end of quote. It is very tempting to unpack all of these statements, but I'm sure you're getting the gist of what I'm suggesting. While the ministry is working on its agenda of building infrastructure that includes, along with regulations and policies, building museums and organizing exhibitions, other high-profile initiatives like Al Ula Royal Commission, with both Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Prince Badr bin Farhan on the board of directors, and thus feeding into sort of a larger plan, or at least understanding how these all different parts come together, has its own ambitious agenda. On a recent trip to magical Al Ula, I attended the opening of Fame, the Andy Warhol exhibition at Mariah Concert Hall, itself an exquisite work of art, and visited the planned Wadi Fen site. This is the problem with trying to be efficient and print on both sides. Did I do that side? While celebrated in Saudi circles, the Andy Warhol exhibition has raised many eyebrows around the world. Why Warhol and why in Al Ula? I quote, Warhol grew up through a time of radical change in America in the 1950s and 1960s, a time of a completely new, vibrant youth culture, and he recorded that and reflected that, said Sumantro Ghosh, arts programming director in Al Ula. Right now in Saudi Arabia, we're in a time of great change, great transformation, he added. Some of the justifications drew on the conjectures that Warhol, who had no connection to the region beyond a quick trip to Kuwait, with which he was not impressed at all, and then to Iran in 1970s, would have relished the chance to show his work in Saudi Arabia and engage with its contradictions, said Warhol Museum Director Patrick Moore. Perhaps one of the objectives for Saudi Arabia here is precisely this: an act of subversion through hosting Western celebrities Warhol and the celebrities he portrayed in the work on display, along with the Warhol exhibition. A separate outdoor exhibition presented the 100 best Arabic posters for shows and festivals around the region. And Hassan Hajjaj, the Moroccan artist and photographer, was there making portraits in Al-Ula of Al-Ula residents. Omar Al-Break, arts programming and activities manager for Arts Al-Ula, argued that they express Warhol's long and continuing influence on the region. So sort of trying to, justify why. No, but that's making the connection between Warhol and pop culture, pop art, with what is happening in the region. Yes. Wadi Fen, which is a public art project, includes art commissions by both globally renowned artists and local talent. The first 5 artists with installations to be completed in 2024 are at Wadi Fen are James Turrell from the US, Manal Dwaya from the Kingdom, Agnes Deans, Hungarian-American, Michael Heiser from the US, and Ahmed Matar from the Kingdom. Announced Ivana Blazwick, chair of Royal Commission for Al-Ula's Public Art Expert Panel. The project, as she explained, aimed to engage with art, nature, community, and history. My last example to include is a new initiative by Abu Dhabi. In March, this past March, the Department of Culture and Tourism, DCT Abu Dhabi, announced the launch of Public Art Abu Dhabi, a wide-reaching initiative that will further the Emirates' long legacy of investing in culture and embedding it in the fabric of society. That's a difficult thing to do anyway. The announcement was commemorated by the unveiling of Wave, a public digital media artwork by the Artistic Collective District and Abu Dhabi's Cultural Foundation. Using an anamorphic illusion technique, the 2D installation recreates perpetually surging three-dimensional waves and was first showcased at COEX K-pop Square in Seoul, South Korea. As with Al-Ula's Wadi Al-Fen artists, Public Art Abu Dhabi programs will reflect the Emirates' intrinsic cultural identity, anchoring a sense of belonging and fostering creativity. Integral to this initiative is its community engagement efforts, acting as a catalyst for creativity and artistic expression in the public domain. Public Art Abu Dhabi will offer opportunities for everyone to engage with new cultural programming. End of quote. With an annual budget of over $35 million US dollars, one objective is to support the Emirates' wider creative industries through public art. Chairman of DCT Abu Dhabi said, Abu Dhabi's public art enriches lives by bringing art to every member of the community, inspiring a sense of civic pride and advancing the capital creative legacy. End of quote. One of the major elements in this initiative is Public Art Abu Dhabi Biennial, slotted to open in November 2024, under the leadership of Reem Fadda, Director of the Cultural Foundation and Abu Dhabi Cultural Programs, and the independent co-curator, curator Galit Ilat. Both spoke of the important role of community in these initiatives. Another of the project is one that Iman already mentioned, is Manar Abu Dhabi, a public art platform which features light art sculptures and installations in the archipelagos and mangroves of Abu Dhabi to connect the different parts of the shores of the different islands, creating different visual perspectives. Also in the program are direct commissions across the Emirate space. When first launched, we all wondered, how would the Saadiyat Cultural District converse with and resonate through artistic practices in the region? On the outset, it engaged with transnational hyphenated identity Arab artists in their efforts to include the region as part of an already well-established Western institution, with all of the unresolved historical bias inherited in the 19th century inception of museums as alternative to colonial expositions and space of negotiating new methods of displaying the other. While the Louvre is visited by locals and Louvre Abu Dhabi is visited by locals and visitors and tourists, there is much in terms of representation that remains desired, despite of the growing influence of its Emirati leadership. Today, we wait to see how will the overall ecosystem across the region converse for a clearer cultural vision that not only serve the national agendas, but contribute to scholarly and academic efforts to actually decolonize the canon and art history, but including the other as an equal and accepted form of knowledge and not a mirror for reflection. These Gulf initiatives, expressing extreme contradictions on the one hand and introducing novel possibilities on the other, are on the surface ambiguous in their larger regional context. Within the celebrated discourse of the postmodern obsession with difference, complicated by the global relapse to identity, at times there is a pronounced Arab identity emerging in the Gulf region. The new Arab identity discourse is seemingly superficial, addressing naming and rhetoric, but not representation. More importantly, however, at times presents a negation of the accepted dominant definition formulated through theories of modernity during the 20th century, and consequently causing a shift in the significance of that definition vis-a-vis the Arab world as a cultural unity. Equally, the various models in the region negotiate a search for identity through asserting new constructions of an old one. They do so, however, within a shifting discourse of culture making and culture tourism, and within the global city model, further complicating the notion of a culture as a site of contestation. The new spaces of culture produced by the global city discourse includes too many sites of conformity to a larger globally encompassing narrative of pseudo-equality and prosperity. The Gulf region, nevertheless, insists on an Arabo-Islamic identity, albeit completely transformed than its mid-20th century origin, and defiantly challenges the separation of Arab and Islamic definition. Time passes quickly. Alongside the fast pace of development in the contemporary scene that goes way beyond the few examples I spoke of and is hard to keep up with, is a quieter, slower pace, less flamboyant, but extremely necessary scholarly work that takes place at academic and research institutions that aim to anchor all of the other initiatives. And I'm going to go quickly through some of this. I just will mention quickly the exhibition Khalij Modern, Pioneers and Collectives in the Arabian Peninsula that took place at NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery in September 2022, argued for a manifestation of transmodernism, as well as allowing a Gulf regional collective view that challenged the contemporary representation of art as selective happening around the Arabian Gulf, almost in a vacuum. Curated by Aisha Stobi, the exhibition drew on her dissertation research into modern movements of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates in the periods of 1940 and 2007. Attempting to negotiate a new and different narrative of the visual production of the Gulf, the exhibition contextualized works and untold possibilities. Stobi also highlighted the role of influx of teachers from the Arab world who established the early art programs in schools that preceded the modern movements. She thus located the development of the Khalij Modern within a larger discourse of Arabism. She said, we see a lot of Egyptian, Syrian, and Palestinian influences evident within our work and various methods and styles that are present within the works. It also highlighted networks of exchanges between the Gulf and the wider Arab region and foregrounded international connections with accounts of art students traveling and receiving training in places like Cairo, Baghdad, as well as various European and US cities. Within the same vein of collective and trans context, Unraveling the Past, a title of the March meeting 2021, organized by the Sharjah Foundation, aimed to think historically in the present, to not only disrupt the prevailing narratives and that neglected the UAE's art scene before the contemporary, but in various ways to open new spaces for connections and intersections. Specifically, the panel Sharjah Biennials in a Regional Context sought regional relations to contextualize the Sharjah Biennial within a historical trajectory that included the Arab Biennial. The Arab Biennial, first in Baghdad in 1974, second in Rabat in 76, and third in Tripoli, Libya in 1980, equally commemorated and criticized as a project, has been overclouded by the politics and seen as a failure. However, to understand the genealogy of the biennial, its roots in a historical necessity that started through the artistic initiatives become obvious. Most importantly, what the Arab Biennial aimed to do and managed to do is make these connections. The state of Kuwait was the only representative in the foundational meeting in 1971 from the Gulf region. However, the establishment of the Emirates Fine Arts Society in Sharjah in 1980 that launched the journal At-Tashkil in September 1984 and amplified voices of very well-known artists, including Hassan Sharif and Nujum al-Ghanim, among others, was an important shift. Their ambition was palpable from its first issue, which included several calls for artists to connect, exhibit, and converse. Consequently, the journal became an essential space to educate, promote, and articulate ideas and experiments, as well as connect them with other creative individuals in and outside of the UAE. The journal invited many of the Arab artists who were present in the Arab biennials and had, because of the change of political situation in these countries, have lost the space or the voice, invited them to participate and educate as well. The journal was a space for art education where institutions did not exist. So they covered, world art as well as regional and local art. Thus, arguably, the society succeeded to realize what the Union of Arab Plastic Artists had proposed but unable to fulfill. In parallel to Tashkil's mission and vision, the Society's annual exhibitions and later the launching of the Sharjah Biennial in 1993, organized by the Sharjah Department of Culture and Information, and their subsequent longevity, would not only ensure local circulation of art, but would essentially accomplish much of what the Union of Arab Plastic Artists had hoped to do through the Arab Biennials. Like the annual exhibitions by the Society, Sharjah Biennial earlier iterations were decidedly regionally focused, which allowed for a wider Arab engagement. Continued to be occupied by questions around the national, regional, and global, as well as endless contemplation of what is Arab art, the archives of At-Tashkil is an astonishing documentation of the struggles and progress of the arts in the UAE. One could think of Mathab as a result of a similar objective. Starting with the collection that Sheikh Hassan Al-Thani, the patron of the museum, accrued along the residencies he supported, the story was an intimate desire for knowledge and self-representation, without concern for a monetary value or competition, particularly before having major collections of Arab art in the region. The objectives of Mathab were symbolized through the inaugural exhibition Sajjal, that initiated the strategy of contextualizing new narratives and negotiated different regional possibilities for a formation and development of modern art from the Arab world and its diasporas. The exhibition proposed a global discourse that historicized Arab modern art within a wider tradition of art history and extended a narrative that challenged the simplistic one of colonial confrontation, leading to uncritical imitation of European art. I'm going to go quickly, and this is similarly. I mean, the curator just wanted to say that Sajjal and Madhaf are strongly rooted in the modernist discourse that cannot easily escape Arab nationalism. Madhaf, especially today under the leadership of Zeina Arida, will continue to be a unique and with its ability to generate research and knowledge in relation to and about the objects it hosts. Similarly, the Bergil Art Foundation, and I don't know why my slides are out of order, the Bergil Art Foundation, with its growing collection and programs, has been instrumental in forcing the canon beyond its comfort zone. Of specific importance is that the exhibitions Bergil organizes draw directly from and hence strengthen scholarship. Accompanying catalogs become important literature and resource, with new knowledge generated by global researchers from the region and beyond. Bergil thus traverses the local and global with extreme ease. Equally, the Sharjah Art Biennial and other initiatives by the Sharjah Art Foundation are exemplary forms of local organic growth into the global, contextualizing regional and non-regional artists with new discourses and narratives. Beyond shifting centers of the art world, thus, these institutions bring centers of knowledge production back to the region. Given the lack of regional academic research, Bergil plays an essential role in support and advancement. The March meeting by Sharjah Foundation has equally grown into an important academic forum where old ideas are revisited from new perspectives, leading into new knowledge. The Misk Art Foundation in Riyadh plays a similar role in Saudi Arabia. There are myriad of educational and creative programs, including that includes the art library. I'm going to end with this. That includes the art library with its aim to produce short text books on the lives and works of list of affluent modern contemporary artists from the region, despite of the initiative's specific focus on Saudi Arabia, is extremely important. The most promising development, and yes, of course, I am very biased, is the ambiguously local, global Al Mawrid Arab Center for the Study of Art, directed by Salwa Maqdadi. The center is part of the NYU Abu Dhabi Research Institute. Excuse me, my throat is telling me I should stop. And works in collaboration with the faculty in the arts and humanities and social sciences, serves faculty research and undergraduate education in NYU Abu Dhabi. But what the Mawrid Research Center aims to do is to bring archives and make research available, material available for research rather. Its location, despite it being an American university, its location in the region will facilitate knowledge production that engages directly with primary resources and thus hopefully outside of Western prejudices. To conclude, culture tourism in the Gulf region, as with everywhere else in the world, excuse me, has certainly been banking on the commodification of art. We spoke of that at some point earlier. The structure and institutions, however, seem to be of explicit importance. We thus need to think of all of these components, the many I introduced today, and the many others, many of you introduced, and others we did not, collectively, to understand the potential and possible trajectories. I already have that, thank you. Art fairs specifically cater to an elite culture. Museums, on the other hand, package the experience of going to the museum as a cultural refinement and the art as a bonus. The infrastructure necessarily developed would support both as well as other aims. Much is happening on every level. Some will take hold, others will be transient. The potential is staggering and enticing. A final word of caution. We must remember, however, that the making of the institution, with everything that it entails, packaging, branding, etc., is a construction of an identity where the local and global interact. What does it say when this codification is developed globally and mostly by the same consultants everywhere in the world. Thus, a valid question in all of this global completion remains: how will the local identity assert itself when it was never allowed space of existence? And most importantly, how will it shift narratives? Thank you.